Hi, my name is Carly Hailstone. I'm a representative of the American Diabetes Association. Today in this video we are going to go over what CAMP is, as well as what the ADA and Camp Sealth's expectations are of our volunteers. The ADA's mission is to prevent and cure diabetes and to improve the lives of all people affected by diabetes. CAMP is a very important part of the second half of that mission. Our camp philosophy is to make sure that every camper has a safe and fun experience at camp. We strive to enhance that classic summer camp experience, not limit or detract from it. Camp Sealth is one of the only camps in the nation to mainstream diabetic campers into a non-diabetic camp and have them in the same cabin groups as other non-diabetic campers. What this means is that our campers experience very real-world situations. One of those is that our camp does not offer very many sugar-free options because it isn't not a diabetes camp. It's just a classic summer camp. You are here to help the campers adjust to these real-world situations, and our overall goal is that every camper gains self-confidence and they learn new skills and they improve their own self-management of their diabetes. At camp, we have a clarification in that each cabin group has two counselors. One is the Camp Sealth counselor, who's in charge of all of their activities and general supervision of the children. Then they have a ADA counselor. We call them RUs to avoid confusion of Sealth counselor or ADA counselor. We have the Sealth counselor, the counselor, and the RU. And the RU is in charge of managing their blood glucose levels out in the field while they're doing their activities and to help out with any highs or lows that they might experience. And to support them while they do this and during meal times, we have the pods. There are 3 pods throughout camp: Medamin, Birdcage, and Holiday House. The pods are set up like small clinics pretty much. First, the campers come in and they check their blood glucose levels with the assistants. They then move on to the dietitians where they do carb counting for each meal. Then they move on to the providers and they have a discussion of how much insulin they're going to be needing for each meal and take into account exercise, the meal itself, and their blood glucose level. Once they've come to a decision, they move on to the nurse's table where they administer their insulin as well as any other medications that they might be on at the time. The basic schedule for a day at camp is that the campers will come in before breakfast and before lunch and before dinner. So before each meal they come in and go through the whole pod system. In between these meals, they're out with their RUs and Sealth counselors doing their camp activities. If they need to, they'll come back to the pod for any assistance they might need. After dinner, we have a staff meeting. This includes all of our volunteers except for the RUs because they're still out with their cabin groups, and we'll be doing basic updates, welcoming new volunteers, and making sure that everybody's on the same page for the next day. Before bedtime, the campers will come in again and check their blood glucose levels one more time. Quiet hours will start at this time. Bedtime varies throughout camp because we have a wide range of ages. We have elementary school all the way to high schoolers. Elementary school kids go to bed earlier than the high schoolers. So there's a varying degree of quiet hours throughout camp. So once your kids have come in for bedtime checks, that's the signal that quiet hours are active, and they will be until 7 a.m. After the bedtime checks, we have a pod meeting. This is facilitated by your pod leader. They will be updating the ruse on everything that was discussed at the staff meeting, as well as signing up for breaks during that time and going over chores or anything that needs to happen for the next day. We also have midnight checks. Midnight checks are based off of what the blood glucose levels were at bedtime. If they were low or high, we need to monitor the kids throughout the night. So we have a couple people from each pod assigned to do midnight checks, and as well as 2 a.m. checks depending upon how the kids are doing each night. And we make sure that only that you are scheduled to do the night checks only once and that you aren't doing them repetitively. We try to disperse it out amongst all of our volunteers. Each pod will be going on one overnight. An overnight is where all of the campers from that pod will be up the hill sleeping in the meadows under the stars. This means that their dinner, bedtime, midnight 2 a.m., and breakfast meal checks will be done in the field. We will set up the pod in the field and be ready to take care of all of those meals. The Roos will be sleeping with their cabins this night to take care of the midnight and 2 a.m. checks. There will be a provider sleeping in the field as well. All the rest of the pod staff can go back down to main camp and sleep in their cabins and then go back up the hill for breakfast checks. And we'll go over this in more detail while we're at camp, but that's kind of a basic overview of what an overnight is. Now, each volunteer will need to take a 2-hour break every day. During this time, you can go hiking. If you want to do any of the water activities, you have to take a swim check before. You can go around camp and explore, or just take a shower, take a nap, whatever you want to do during this time. When the Roos take their breaks, they get replaced so that we always have a volunteer with the campers, and this replacement is called a rover. How we organize this is by using a board, something like that will look like this. So you have the pod volunteers breaks as well as the Roos breaks and who will be covering them. The pod leader will be helping to organize this and making sure that everyone's on the same page of who's covering what breaks and who will be taking breaks when. While the campers are at camp, the ADA is in charge of all of their medical needs, whether it be diabetes related or not. In each pod there's a binder, and it has a lot of information from the blood sugar meters that we use to different pump settings and that kind of stuff, to different medical forms and crisis plans and that kind of stuff. Some of the medical forms, there will be a medical log in each camper's chart, and in this log we use it for when the campers need basic medical treatment. This is scraped knees that just need band-aids, supplying them with ibuprofen, or they have bug bites and need anti-itch cream, or they have a bad sunburn and need aloe, that kind of basic stuff that we can just treat them and send them back out with their cabin group. If it is a more serious injury, it needs to have an incident form filled out, and this will be in the binder. An incident form is for when a camper sprains their ankle and it needs to be wrapped, or they have really high ketones and are really sick, or they broke their arm or have a concussion. Those kinds of accident type things where they need a lot more medical attention than just treating them and sending them back out. They have to be in the pod for a while. In this case, we would fill out the incident form just so that we can keep track of how we are treating them. Other medical things that go on at camp is that we have multiple campers that are either celiac or they are gluten-free. The gluten intolerance group will be at camp at the same time we are. They will be providing gluten-free options for all of our campers that need them. Some of our campers will have inhalers or EpiPens with them. These will be in the RU backpacks. If they need to be used, it needs to be documented in the medical log. And if you are a RU or a rover and have the backpack that these are in, and you have questions about the inhaler or the EpiPen, feel free to talk to one of the providers or nurses about it, and they should be able to answer any questions you have. Something else that comes up that we deal with a lot of at camp is camper behavior. There are multiple types of camper behavior issues that we face at camp, and there's some basic rule breaking, like no throwing rocks. Feel free to enforce those types of rules, but if it starts to be a more serious behavior, you need to get a hold of a Sealth staff member. We first need to figure out if this more serious behavior is diabetes related or not. How you do this is by checking the camper's blood glucose level. If the blood glucose level is within range, then it is a non-diabetes related behavior, and the Camp Sealth staff will take charge and correct that behavior. If the blood glucose level is not within range, then the behavior might be diabetes related, and so we will then treat their blood glucose level and deal with the behavior following the ADA guidelines. And so if you are a RU or a rover and you're the one witnessing this behavior, the Sealth staff needs to be informed of it, but the medical director and ADA rep need to be informed as well, so that we can all stay on the same page and know how this behavior is being addressed, especially if it progresses. Another thing we see at camp that we strive very hard to avoid and stop immediately is bullying. If you see anything along the lines of bullying, again, you need to inform the Sealth staff as well as the ADA rep and the medical director. And so a huge part of this is communication. We need to be communicating with the ADA volunteers and team as well as the Camp Sealth staff, because without that we can't treat behaviors and blood glucose levels appropriately. As a behavior gets more serious, we may need to fill out a behavior report. This will be in the binder, and this is why you need to report it to the ADA rep as well as the medical director so that they can document it and deal with it appropriately. Our campers have a tendency to get very fond of our volunteers. They like you guys a lot and enjoy your company, but we don't want them to get too attached. They are there to be at summer camp. Once they're blood glucose level has been treated and they are ready to go out and do their activities, they need to go back out with their cabin groups. We don't want them hanging out in the pods and not being a part of camp. We also have campers that deal with homesickness. Some of our campers are pretty young, and so it's not uncommon. If you do see a camper dealing with homesickness, get a hold of the Sealth staff. They've been dealing with campers all summer long. They're very experienced and know exactly how to deal with homesickness and are a really good resource. With any of these behavior issues, sometimes parents do need to be contacted, and if that is the case, we don't want the kids contacting their parents or our volunteers contacting the parents. We want, if a parent does need to be contacted, we want the Sealth staff to be contacting them or the ADA rep or medical director. Those are the only 3 people allowed to be calling parents. So with risk management, this is covered in your staff manual. One of the most important things to keep in mind at camp is that we deal with needles. And we try extremely hard to avoid accidental needle sticks. There are a couple types of accidental needle sticks. The first one is not so serious. It's where a clean needle accidentally pokes you, or a clean needle accidentally pokes a camper, and it only contacts one person. In this case, you need to first dispose of the needle, then clean yourself up, or the camper, whoever was poked by it, and then you can continue on with what you were doing as soon as everything is cleaned up and you're ready to go back to work. The second type of accidental needle stick is much more serious. This is where a needle has already poked someone, so it is a used needle, and then pokes you or a camper. For example, if a nurse was giving a shot to a camper because they were unable to do it themselves, and the insulin has been administered to the camper, and then the needle accidentally sticks the nurse, in this case, the needle has touched the camper and the nurse. Or it could be vice versa, that the needle touched the volunteer and then touches the camper skin. In both of these cases, first you need to dispose of the needle in a sharps container. Then you need to clean yourself and or the camper up, band-aids and that sorts, and clean up any blood if there was any. And then in this case, it needs to be reported to the ADA rep as well as the medical director immediately. If this happens, there's a lot of paper to be filled out, as well as blood tests that need to be run to make sure that there hasn't been any transfer of blood-borne pathogens. This has not happened at camp in my time, and hopefully it will not happen at camp in the near future. And something else that is in your staff manual is who can do what at camp. This is a form in the back, and it is a national ADA form. At Camp Sealth, we go by stricter guidelines. So when you're looking at this form that says that assistants can do this or nurses can do this, I want you to take it with a grain of salt, because just because that form says you might be able to do that under supervision or indirect supervision, that might not be what we do at camp. So if you're looking at this and have questions about it or are having a hard time understanding it because it's a bit confusing of a form, ask the medical director or some of our veteran volunteers or the ADA rep, and we'll explain what your duties are and what you can and cannot do while you're at camp. Also, in the staff manual, there is a crisis communication plan. This plan is in place for any events like an earthquake or a shooting or a severe accident or someone having to be airlifted to a hospital or something like that. In case of an event like this plan pretty much says that any communication to news outlets, social media, parents, and anything like that needs to go through the ADA representative. We don't want you posting to social media or Twitter or contacting other people about what's going on at camp. You can let your family and friends know that you are safe and fine and healthy and where you're going to be headed to next, but we don't want you dispersing information about the ongoings at camp. That needs to be handled by the ADA representative. And if you have any questions about it, you need to talk to the ADA representative and they'll be able to answer them. So we have multiple expectations of our volunteers, and we try to keep these in line with what Camp Sealth expects from their staff as well. One of these expectations is to have a camp name. A camp name is a fake name that you go by while you are at camp. It's a fun tradition that we do. For example, my name at camp is Soleil, and I came up with this name because that's my dog's name. And there's a very wide variety of camp names. We've had Strawberry Shortcake, Flapjack, Juno, Peach. Pretty much it can be anything that you want, which means that think about it beforehand because it can be challenging to come up with a name that you will be called for a week on the spot. But also keep in mind that you are with children, so it does need to be a camp appropriate name. Another expectation while we are at camp is dealing with technology. We are not allowed to have any technology in front of the campers. This means no iPads, no MP3 players, no laptops, nothing like that. If you are going to be using those kinds of devices, it needs to be done out of sight of the campers. This means a back room, in your cabin. If there are times in the pod when it would be okay, but you need to be aware that campers do come into the pod, so just because campers aren't there at the moment doesn't mean they aren't going to just walk in the door in the next minute. There is one exception to this rule, and that is cell phones. We use cell phones to contact our RUs out in the field or to contact providers in the pod. We do have on-call providers all day, and so we do expect you to have your cell phones and to have chargers to keep them working. But if you are using your cell phone in front of a camper, it needs to be for ADA purposes. If you are going to be using your cell phone for personal reasons, like checking your email, texting your friends, making personal phone calls or work phone calls, then you need to, again, be out of sight of the campers, in a back room, in the cabin, somewhere where they, one, aren't going to overhear you and aren't going to see you. Because they are not allowed to have any of their technologies, they aren't allowed to have their cell phones or anything like that. And so it really cuts down on an unfair feeling if they don't see you using it. So keep that in mind while you're at camp. it's a challenge, but you need to do it. Another important thing is the dress code. We are dealing with young children, so you need to be dressed appropriately. What this means is no low-cut tops, no midriff, your pants need to stay up, no underwear showing, no short shorts or short skirts. Pretty much just keep it appropriate. We don't expect you to buy a whole new wardrobe or anything like that. You just need to keep in mind that we're dealing with young kids and it needs to be appropriate. For the water activities, for bathing suits, there is a no bikinis rule. If that's the only bathing suit you have, you need to bring a t-shirt to go wear over your bikini. Another thing is flip-flops. There is a no flip-flop rule while at camp. You can only wear flip-flops in the shower. This does not mean you can wear them walking to the showers or walking back from the showers. It means in the shower. You are allowed to wear other sandals, but they need to be strapped to your foot. They need to be sturdy, and this is to avoid twisted ankles and stubbed toes and that kind of thing. So keep that in mind when you're packing. If you're packing flip-flops, they're shower flip-flops, and any other sandals need to have straps to keep them on your feet. Another important thing is appropriate camper and camp volunteer relationships. What I mean by this is that there needs to be a 1-to-2 ratio whenever you're dealing with a camper. This means 2 campers and 1 adult, or 2 adults to 1 camper. This is for your safety as well as theirs. And to help with this, we have all of our pods staffed by a minimum of 2 volunteers at all times. And if you have any questions about this, ask your ADA representative. Another really important relationship is with our host camp, Camp Sealth. And sometimes our relationship with them runs extremely smoothly and it's great, and other times we have bumps along the way. And so it's very much a team effort, and to do this it requires a lot of communication. If you are having any concerns about your interactions with ADA volunteers or staff or the Sealth staff, and these concerns cannot be resolved by discussing them with the parties involved, then please get a hold of the ADA staff or Camp Sealth's Carrie. Her camp name is Care Bear, and we will address them as best we can and as soon as possible. We want to keep our volunteers happy as well as our host camp happy. And so if we don't know an issue is going on, we can't do anything about it to improve it. So make us aware of it so that we can help out in any way possible. All of our volunteers are required to participate in daily chores. These will be posted in the pods and are expected to be done every day and by everyone. While we are at camp, keep in mind that nobody is allowed in the kitchen. This is a Camp Sealth rule. There is one exception, and those are the people that are appointed by our lead dietitian. If you have not heard anything about this, then just function under the rule that you're not allowed to be in the kitchen. Our campers have various food allergies, and our host camp is a no peanut camp. This means if you're bringing any snacks to camp, you need to make sure that there are no peanuts in them because we cannot have them at camp. You're allowed to bring snacks with you if you yourself are diabetic. We will not be providing low treatments for you. You need to be bringing your own low treatments. We encourage you not to keep food in the cabins because we have very smart raccoons at camp, as well as mice. So to cut down on them getting into various places, we try to keep no food in the cabins and keep them in the pods. But you also need to keep in mind that we have very limited fridge space, so don't bring snacks that need to be refrigerated. The gluten intolerance group will be providing gluten-free meals for our volunteers if you need them. And Camp Sealth will be providing vegetarian and vegan options if you need them. If you do, you need to email the ADA so that we can make a list and make sure that that there's enough food for everyone while we're at camp. So, on the day that you are scheduled to arrive at camp, we expect you to be there by 9 a.m. To manage this, you need to first check the ferry schedules to make sure that you can catch a ferry and be able to drive to camp to be there on time. Once you get to camp, you will drive down the road here and it will bring you into main camp. There is temporary parking here, and if you continue driving over, there's temporary parking here. This building right here is Madammen. This is where you will check in and drop off your stuff. Once you've done those two things, we will assign you a cabin where you will be sleeping, and you will need to drive your car back up the hill because that's where our parking is, and you'll have to hike back down, and that can take 15 to 20 minutes. The day that you are scheduled to depart, we expect you to leave about 1 p.m. and this is so that you have time to train the person that is taking over your position. They'll be getting there at 9, you'll be leaving at 1. There's a few hours to get them oriented to what you've been doing while you were at camp. Before you leave, you need to fill out a survey and a timesheet. This will be at Madammen, and you also need to check out at Madammen. This helps us keep track of who's at camp and who has already left camp. And that's it for this video. If you have any questions, you can bring them to the training in July, or you can contact the ADA. See you at the in-person trainings. Bye.